In 1659, a man named Tristram Coffin bought an island 30 miles off the coast of Massachusetts for 30 pounds and 2 beaver hats, one for the seller, one for the seller's wife. Today, the median home on that island costs $3.7 million, and a family would need to earn more than $800,000 a year to afford it. 90% of the people who live there year-round cannot buy a home. The fire department can't fill its vacancies because firefighters can't afford the rent. And the cobblestone street that Tristram Coffin's descendants laid down in the 1830s, the one built so that wagons loaded with whale oil barrels wouldn't get stuck in the mud, is now the most expensive stretch of real estate in Massachusetts. This is the story of Nantucket, and it is not the story you think it is. It is not a story about a quaint New England island. It is a story about what happens when a place is saved by neglect, then destroyed by attention. The island itself is a leftover from the last ice age, a crescent of glacial moraine and outwash plain, 48 square miles of sand and scrub, deposited at the farthest reach of the Laurentide ice sheet and cut off from the mainland by rising seas about 6,000 years ago. The highest point is barely 100 feet above the water. There are no natural stands of timber, no mineral deposits, no freshwater rivers. When the English arrived, roughly 3,000 Wampanoag people were living there, governed by sachems who had been on the island for millennia, fishing its waters, farming its thin soils. Within 2 years of Coffin's purchase, 2 of those sachems, Beinecke and Nicanus, relinquished their rights to the entire island for 66 pounds sterling. The Wampanoag petitioned the Massachusetts courts to reverse the deal. In 1750, a judge upheld it. Coffin and his original investors, there were 20 of them, each holding a share, didn't come for whales. They came for farming and sheep. The original settlement wasn't even in what is now Nantucket town. It was near Capham Pond, a small harbor on the north shore. When that harbor silted up, a recurring theme in Nantucket's history, this island's relationship with sand, the settlers dismantled their houses and moved them 2 miles northeast to the present location, closer to the deeper harbor. They needed tradesmen, so they sold half shares to weavers, millers, and builders on the condition that the men live on the island and practice their trade for at least 3 years. By 1667, 27 shares had been divided among 31 owners. It was, from the beginning, a business venture with residency requirements. But an island with no trees and thin soil doesn't sustain much agriculture, and the overgrazing from the growing number of farms made even that untenable. Before long, the settlers were looking at the ocean for their living. The story Nantucketers tell is that it started when a whale swam into the harbor, a gray whale, what they called a scrag, and the men chased it down and killed it from small boats. That was sometime before 1672. Within a generation, they weren't waiting for whales to come to them. They were going to the whales. What made Nantucket's whaling operation different from the start was its workforce. The Wampanoag men became the backbone of the industry. A typical whaleboat crew in the early 1700s was 5 Wampanoag oarsmen and 1 white helmsman. As the historian Nathaniel Philbrick has written, without the native population, which outnumbered the white population well into the 1720s, the island never would have become a successful whaling port. But the Wampanoag didn't share in the profits equally. The colonists had constructed a system of debt bondage that ensured a steady supply of native labor. Men who owed money they could only work off at sea on someone else's ship, hunting someone else's whale. By 1763, epidemic disease had reduced the Wampanoag community on the island to just 358. One devastating outbreak of unknown origin killed 222 Wampanoag in a single season, while leaving the English settlers untouched. Some of the survivors left Nantucket. Some married into the small African-American community that had been established in a neighborhood called New Guinea on the southwest outskirts of town near the windmills on Mill Hill. The last person acknowledged as a Nantucket Wampanoag, Dorcas Honorable, died in 1855. So the industry that built Nantucket's wealth was, from the beginning, built on other people's labor and other people's land. That's worth knowing because it establishes a pattern. Nantucket has always been a place where one group does the work and another group gets the house on Main Street. The Quakers had arrived on the island in the late 17th century, and their influence was enormous, not just religiously, but economically. They promoted thrift, discipline, and reinvestment. They were also, importantly, the dominant merchant class. The Quaker networks connected Nantucket to markets in London, and the Quaker ethic of plain living didn't prevent the accumulation of spectacular wealth. It just meant you expressed that wealth in restrained architecture, which is one reason Nantucket's houses look the way they do. Even the grandest homes on Upper Main Street are austere compared to the mansions being built in mainland cities at the same time. The Quakers also played a role in the abolitionist movement, and Nantucket became part of the Underground Railroad, providing sanctuary to African Americans escaping slavery. Frederick Douglass gave one of his first public speeches at the Nantucket Athenaeum in 1841, 5 years before the fire burned the building to the ground. By the early 1800s, Nantucket was the undisputed whaling capital of the world. Not one of the whaling capitals, the capital. The island's fleet sailed every ocean on Earth, around Cape Horn, across the Pacific, into the Arctic. Voyages lasted 3, 4, sometimes 5 years. The men brought back sperm whale oil, the finest illuminant known, burning brighter and cleaner than anything else available, along with spermaceti for candles and ambergris for perfume. A single successful voyage could bring back 2,000 barrels of oil, and at peak prices in the 1840s, a barrel of sperm oil sold for roughly $1.40 a gallon. Those products lit the lamps of American and European cities, lubricated the machinery of the Industrial Revolution, and the money flowed back to a single tiny island 30 miles from shore. At its peak, the American whaling industry was bringing in about $10 million a year, and Nantucket was the capital of all of it. The per capita wealth on the island rivaled anywhere in the country. The wharves, Strait Wharf, Old South Wharf, Commercial Wharf, were stacked with barrels. Cooperages, rope walks, smithies, sail lofts, candle factories, and counting houses crowded the waterfront. The smell of rendering blubber hung over the harbor like a permanent fog. The most famous voyage of all nearly ended the industry before its peak. In November 1820, the Nantucket whale ship Essex, captained by George Pollard, Jr., was rammed and sunk by an enraged sperm whale in the South Pacific, an event so improbable that it shocked the maritime world. The 20-man crew spent months adrift in open boats. Only 8 survived. When Herman Melville heard the story decades later, it became the seed of Moby Dick. Melville set his novel's departure from Nantucket, and the name of Ahab's first mate, Starbuck, came from one of the island's most prominent whaling families. 2/3 of this terraqueous globe are the Nantucketers, Melville wrote. For the sea is his. He owns it, as emperors own empires. To understand just how much money the whale oil produced, walk up Main Street today. You can still do it on the same cobblestones that were laid beginning around 1837, imported from the mainland, likely from Gloucester, because Nantucket has no source of stone large enough for paving. The stones were set upright, narrow ends driven into a bed of sand, flat tops up. They were practical infrastructure, not decoration. The heavy wagons rolling barrels of whale oil from the wharves to the refineries and candle factories needed a surface that wouldn't turn to mire in the rain. At the peak of the industry, between July of 1842 and July of 1845, more than 44,000 vessels passed through Nantucket Sound. At the top of that cobblestone street, Joseph Starbuck, quite possibly the island's richest whale oil merchant, owner of multiple ships and a candle factory, built 3 identical brick mansions between 1836 and 1838. They still stand at 93, 95, and 97 Main Street, and they are still called the 3 bricks. He built them for his 3 sons, George, Matthew, and William. One of them, the middle brick, remains in the ownership of Starbuck descendants to this day. Across the street, his son-in-law, William Hadwin, a Rhode Island silversmith who had come to Nantucket in 1820 to attend a cousin's wedding, married into the Starbuck family, partnered with that cousin in a whale oil and candle-making business, and grown wealthier with each passing year, built 2 Greek Revival mansions in 1845 and 1847. The larger one, at 96 Main Street, was for himself and his wife, Eunice Starbuck. It had fluted Ionic columns and a portico that evoked a temple. The architect, Frederick Brown Coleman, was simultaneously working on the new Athenaeum. The Hadwin house was completed 1 year before everything changed. Together with its companion house at 94 Main, built for Hadwin's niece, with Corinthian columns, and the 3 bricks across the street, the houses formed a family compound of staggering ambition for a place that was, after all, a sand and scrub island 30 miles from the nearest railroad. The Hadwin and Starbuck families had more money than they could reasonably spend on Nantucket, so they spent it on architecture that announced to anyone walking up Main Street exactly how much whale oil was worth. By the mid-1840s, nearly 10,000 people called Nantucket home, making it the 42nd largest city in the United States, ahead of many mainland towns that had every geographic advantage Nantucket lacked. 3 newspapers were being published. The town had produced not just whale oil, but culture and commerce that radiated outward. Maria Mitchell, born on the island in 1818 to a Quaker family, would become America's first professional female astronomer, discovering a comet in 1847 from the roof of the Pacific National Bank. Roland Hussey Macy, born in 1822, shipped out on a whaling voyage as a teenager and came back with a red star tattooed on his hand, the star he later used as the logo for his department store, which became the largest in the world. James Folger, born in 1835, would head west during the gold rush and start a coffee company that still bears his name. A disproportionate number of American commercial dynasties trace their roots to this single, small island. But the whaling men had already begun to notice something. The whales were harder to find. Overhunting had pushed the herds farther from Nantucket's waters, and the voyages were getting longer. The harbor, always shallow, was silting up. A sandbar across the mouth of the harbor prevented the largest, heaviest laden ships from entering. The islanders even built an ingenious floating dry dock device called the camels to lift ships over the bar, but it was a workaround, not a solution. The ships were increasingly choosing New Bedford instead, which had a deep water port, and after 1840, a railroad connection that could move oil to market faster than any island-bound fleet. Nantucket could never match that advantage. You cannot build a railroad to an island 30 miles out to sea. The night of July 13, 1846 was hot and dry. It had barely rained in weeks. Around 11 o'clock, a watchman on the South Tower spotted fire. It had started in the hat shop of William Geary at roughly 30 Main Street. Geary pressed his hats using irons heated in a stove with a stovepipe that ran through the wall. Every evening, he put out the fire and walked home. That night, unbeknownst to him, a tiny spark caught inside the clogged stovepipe. 2 volunteer fire companies arrived at the scene at roughly the same time. What happened next has been documented in excruciating detail by the Nantucket Historical Association. The 2 companies argued over who had jurisdiction to fight the fire. While they argued, the flames went through the roof. Some companies held their ground bravely. At least 2 others abandoned their engines entirely, which were themselves destroyed in the blaze. The wind was blowing hard from the east. The fire jumped from building to building across the narrow streets. Everything was wood. Everything was dry. The sidewalks were wood. The buildings were pressed together. Then the barrels of whale oil stored on the wharves caught. They didn't just burn, they exploded. Burning oil flowed across the docks and into the harbor. One eyewitness described a sea of fire on the water itself, the harbor ablaze, the sky red, the smoke visible from the mainland. Gunpowder was detonated in an attempt to create fire breaks. It didn't work. 7 hours later, by the time the sun rose on July 14th, a third of the town was gone. 36 acres, between 400 and 500 buildings. The Athenaeum, with its books and irreplaceable whaling artifacts and historical documents. The rope walks, the cooperages, the chandleries, the candle factories, the blacksmith shops. Nearly every wharf. Conservative estimates put the damage at $1 million, roughly $33 million in today's money. 800 people were homeless. Not a single person died in the fire, but the town's commercial infrastructure, the physical plant of the whaling industry, was gutted. And here is the fact that organizes everything that comes after. The Pacific National Bank, built in 1818 out of brick at the foot of Main Street, stopped the fire from spreading west. The Tristram Coffin house, the brick mansion at the corner of Broad and Center, emerged largely unscathed. The grand homes of Upper Main Street, the Three Bricks, the Hadwin House, survived untouched. The homes of the rich were spared. The waterfront, where the working people lived and labored, was destroyed. Response from the mainland was immediate. Communities up and down the coast sent money, food, clothing, medical supplies. The town rebuilt, but into what? The fire was the wound, but the killing blows came in quick succession. In 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. No fewer than 14 ships sailed from Nantucket for San Francisco that year. By January 1850, 650 Nantucketers, a quarter of the voting population, had headed west. They were followed by hundreds more. The harbor was still silting up. New Bedford was still pulling ships away. Then the Civil War came, and Confederate commerce raiders destroyed virtually all of the remaining Nantucket whaling fleet. And then petroleum arrived, cheap, abundant, pumped out of the ground in Pennsylvania. It replaced whale oil almost overnight. In 1846, American whaling was at its peak, with 735 vessels. 75 of those hailed from Nantucket. Within 20 years, the industry was effectively dead. The population plummeted. From nearly 10,000 in 1840, Nantucket fell to around 4,000 by 1870 and kept falling through decade after decade, losing more than 3% of its people per year through the 1860s, a rate of exodus that rivals the worst years of any Rust Belt city. By 1880, it was under 3,500. By 1900, barely 3,000 remained, less than a third of the population the island had supported at its peak. The 42nd largest city in America had become a footnote. The wharves rotted, the shops on the rebuilt Main Street shuttered. The grand houses, the ones the fire had spared, sat untouched, slowly weathering to gray in the salt air. No one demolished them because there was no one to build anything in their place. The town that had been one of the richest per capita in America became one of the most economically isolated communities on the East Coast. For the better part of 50 years, nobody came, nobody built, nobody tore anything down. The place was simply forgotten. And this is the paradox at the center of Nantucket's story. The poverty saved the buildings. The neglect preserved the architecture. In mainland cities, the Victorian era brought waves of rebuilding. Tear down the old, put up the new. In Nantucket, there was no money to tear anything down, no money to modernize, no money to replace the hand-hewn clapboards with machine-cut siding, or the small paned windows with plate glass. The town simply sat there, more than 800 structures built before the Civil War, slowly graying but structurally intact, like a ship in a bottle. The cobblestones on Main Street settled deeper into their sand bed, but they held. By the 1890s, a trickle of summer visitors began arriving. Artists, writers, people from Boston and New York who found the island's emptiness romantic. A few entrepreneurs saw a possibility. A narrow-gauge railroad was built in 1881, connecting the town to Surfside and later to the village of Siasconset on the eastern shore, carrying summer passengers past the moors and cranberry bogs. The train was a quaint, rickety affair. The island is barely flat enough for tracks, and it went bankrupt and shut down by 1917. Hotels opened, closed, opened again. A Life magazine spread in 1937 described 60,000 summer visitors replacing whalers on the island. But those were seasonal numbers. The year-round community was still hollowed out. From 1900 to 1918, in a detail that captures the island's ambivalence about outsiders, Nantucket banned automobiles entirely. When they were finally permitted, the streets that had been designed for horse-drawn wagons and whale oil carts remained narrow and cobblestoned, unchanged because there had never been any reason or any money to widen them. The island became an art colony in the 1920s, attracting painters who wanted to capture the light on the moors and the harbor. Tony Sarg, the illustrator and puppeteer, moved there in 1922, and in 1937 staged the famous Sea Monster hoax, floating an inflatable creature across the harbor. It was exactly the kind of eccentric charm that defined the island between the wars. Charming, a little odd, harmless, and profoundly unmoneyed. During the Depression, the population dipped again. During the Second World War, the island was quiet, the harbor empty. The wharves continued to rot. The tourism grew, slowly, but by the 1950s, Nantucket was still a fraying, salt-worn place. The wharves were rotting into the harbor. The storefronts along Main Street were shabby. More and more day trippers were arriving by ferry from Hyannis, spending a few dollars on chowder and postcards, then leaving. The year-round population hovered around 3,500. The island was alive, but just barely. Then came Walter Beinecke, Jr. Beinecke was an heir to the Sperry and Hutchinson fortune, the family behind S&H Green Stamps, the trading stamp company that was, at its peak, printing 3 times as many stamps as the U.S. Post Office. He had summered on Nantucket since childhood. He was 50 years old, a successful real estate developer and cattle rancher, and he had a theory. His theory was simple, and he was blunt about it. Cape Cod had the same beaches, the same sunshine, the same salt air, and it was 3 hours closer to Boston and $60 cheaper to reach. What Cape Cod did not have was Nantucket's history, the cobblestones, the captain's houses, the whaling-era streetscape that, thanks to a half-century of benign neglect, was more intact than anything on the mainland. That history, Beinecke understood, was a commodity, and like all commodities, it could be developed, if you controlled enough of it. Through a company he set up called Sherburne Associates, named after Nantucket's original colonial name, Beinecke began buying. He bought storefronts on Main Street. He bought the deteriorated wharves along the waterfront. He bought the entirety of Strait Wharf. He bought the Jared Coffin House, the 1845 brick mansion that had been operating as a hotel under management that attracted rowdy and destructive clientele. By some estimates, Sherburne Associates eventually controlled 80% of the retail space in downtown Nantucket. Then he began to reshape the island according to a specific vision. He wanted fewer visitors who would, as he told Time magazine in 1968, buy 6 postcards and 2 hot dogs, and more visitors who would rent a hotel room, buy a painting, stay for a week. He envisioned an island that served steaks instead of hot dogs and sold paintings instead of postcards. He refused to renew the lease on his docks for one of the excursion steamers from Hyannis. He demanded that the other carry fewer passengers at higher fares. He restored the waterfront buildings, filling in gaps with careful reproductions of 18th century architecture. He formed the Nantucket Historical Trust, encouraged local craftsmen to revive traditional building techniques, and cleared the industrial clutter that had blocked public access to the waterfront for decades. The project was preservation, but it was also explicitly exclusion. Beinecke was, in his own words, trading up the island, from those who saved green stamps to those who didn't need to. One local observer put it more plainly. If Nantucket becomes a little sophisticated, a little high-priced, then I think it's all right. If it becomes a Coney Island, I think it's dead. His approach was frankly elitist, and it was enormously controversial. But it was effective. In 1966, the entire island was designated a National Historic Landmark, recognized by the National Park Service as the finest surviving architectural and environmental example of a late 18th and early 19th century New England seaport town. The strict building code was enforced with new rigor. No building on the island could be altered without approval, and the standards required that new construction match the historic character of the existing streetscape. What Beinecke had done was take the accident of history, a century of poverty that happened to preserve a town, and turn it into a brand. He wasn't just restoring buildings, he was creating a product, and the product was Nantucket itself. It worked beyond anything anyone could have imagined. Through the 1970s and 1980s, property values climbed. The island attracted wealthy Northeasterners, finance people, lawyers, media executives, who bought the old captain's houses and restored them to pristine condition, following the building code's strict requirements for historical accuracy. The gray cedar shingles that had once been the cheapest possible siding, they required no paint, just exposure to salt air, became a deliberate aesthetic choice, a signifier of taste. By the 1980s, Steve Karp of New England Development had taken over many of Beinecke's former properties, buying and upgrading old hotels and retail spaces, pushing the island's commercial identity further upmarket. His company, later known as Nantucket Island Resorts, came to operate the White Elephant Hotel and other high-end properties. More recently, a Boston-based firm called Blue Flag Partners has been acquiring prime commercial real estate at a breathtaking pace. In 2019, it purchased a collection of properties on Center Street for $25.1 million. In the 1990s, the price curve went exponential. Between 1990 and 2000, the year-round population grew by nearly 5% annually. But what was growing even faster than the population was the price of the houses. And what was growing faster still was the gap between what those houses cost and what the people who actually lived on the island could afford to pay. The 2020 census counted 14,255 residents, a 40% increase over 2010. But that number was likely inflated by people who had ridden out the pandemic on the island and were counted as residents rather than seasonal visitors. The real year-round number is probably closer to 10 or 11,000. Today, Nantucket is the wealthiest county in Massachusetts by median home value, and depending on how you measure it, one of the wealthiest in the United States. The year-round population is roughly 14 to 15,000. In summer, it swells to 80,000, a five-fold increase that strains every system on the island, from water supply to waste disposal to road capacity, all on infrastructure designed for a fraction of that number. 55% of the island's housing stock is reserved for seasonal or occasional use, 17 times the national average. The median listing price for a home is nearly $5 million. A home on Nantucket recently sold for $42 million, the most expensive residential transaction in the history of Massachusetts. Meanwhile, the median family income on the island is about $163,000 a year, and that income has risen only 9% since 2015, while the median home price has jumped 140% to $3.7 million. The numbers are so extreme they start to sound abstract, so consider what they mean in practice. A family earning $163,000, a household income that would be comfortable almost anywhere in the country, cannot come close to buying a home on Nantucket. They cannot come close to renting one at market rates either, because the landlord can make more renting to vacationers for $2,000 a night in July than renting to a school teacher for $2,000 a month year-round. Since 2015, Nantucket has lost 205 year-round rental units. They weren't demolished, they were converted to short-term vacation rentals. And in 2024, 22% of homes were actively used as short-term rentals, making them unavailable to the people who actually live there. The cobblestones on Main Street are still there. Tourists walk over them every summer, past the Three Bricks, past the Hadwin House with its Ionic columns, past boutiques selling $400 cashmere sweaters in spaces where coopers once made barrels. Small fishermen's cottages in town, the kind of houses that working Nantucketers once lived in, have sold for as much as $6.7 million. The buildings look exactly as they did in 1845, which is the whole point. But the people who keep the island functioning day to day, the teachers, the nurses, the plumbers, the cooks, the police officers, are increasingly unable to stay. Some commute by ferry from the mainland, a journey that takes over 2 hours each way and is unreliable in winter weather. Canceled ferries can strand workers off-island for days. Others double and triple up in shared housing, sleeping in shifts. Others simply leave, and the businesses they worked for can't find replacements. The hospital struggles to hire. The schools lose teachers mid-year. The restaurants that serve the summer crowds can't staff their kitchens. In testimony before the Massachusetts legislature, Nantucket's fire chief, Stephen Murphy, reported that the police department had 6 open positions and 3 officers preparing to leave because they could not afford housing. A representative of the Affordable Housing Trust testified that the food pantry had received requests from 3 families sharing a single 3-bedroom house. At the time of the hearing, there were no homes for sale on the island under $1 million. A select board member warned in 2025 that without workforce housing, we don't have an operational town. Housing Nantucket, a nonprofit founded in 1994 specifically to stem the tide of year-round residents leaving the island, now serves households earning between $50,000 and $350,000 a year. A family earning $350,000 a year needs help affording housing. That sentence does not make sense anywhere else in America. In 2002, the Massachusetts legislature had to pass a special act, Chapter 301, just to acknowledge that Nantucket's housing crisis was so extreme that the standard definitions of affordable didn't apply. The law defined middle income on Nantucket as households earning up to 150% of the county median, a threshold that, in most of Massachusetts, would put a family firmly in the upper middle class. Nantucket's local zoning goes even further, extending housing assistance to families earning up to 240% of the area median income. 240%. That's a family earning nearly $400,000 a year, and they still qualify for help. And yet, when the island held a special town meeting in November 2025 to consider tighter restrictions on short-term rentals, the single policy change most likely to return some housing stock to year-round residents, roughly 1,500 people showed up, and more than 70% voted to keep the rules lax. They voted to preserve the right to rent their properties to vacationers with no restrictions on length of stay. The tourism economy won. The seasonal dollar won. The firefighter who can't make rent lost again. Over 50% of the island's land is protected open space, unavailable for development. A protection that preserves the fragile ecosystem and the scenic beauty that draws the tourists, but also ensures there is almost nowhere left to build for the people who serve them. The town has invested $20 million in a program called Neighborhood First to create workforce housing. It has approved a permanent $6.5 million annual override to support affordable housing. The state has been asked to approve a transfer fee on sales over $2 million. The legislature hasn't acted. This is the end of the story that began with the cobblestones. Those stones were laid in 1837 by whale oil merchants who needed a durable road for their business. The business was brutal, built on the dispossession of the Wampanoag, on years-long voyages that killed men by the hundreds, on the near extinction of a species. But it was a real business conducted by people who lived on the island, whose children went to school on the island, who built homes they intended to occupy for generations. Joseph Starbuck built the 3 bricks for his sons because he expected them to stay. William Hadwin built his Greek Revival mansion because this was where his life was. They weren't investing in Nantucket. They were living in it. Walter Beinecke built nothing for his sons on Nantucket. He built a product. He took a real place and turned it into an idea of a place. The idea of old New England, of cobblestones and gray shingles and harbor light, of wealth that looked like heritage. It was a brilliant idea. The buildings survived. The streetscape survived. The cobblestones survived. What didn't survive was the possibility of an ordinary person making a life there. The Whaling Museum on Broad Street, housed in a restored 1847 candle factory, one of the buildings that survived the Great Fire, has a 46-foot sperm whale skeleton suspended from its ceiling. Tourists file through in summer, learning about the voyages and the oil and the Essex. The museum charges admission. The gift shop sells scrimshaw reproductions and books about the whaling era. Across the street, a restaurant serves $40 lobster rolls. The disconnect between what is being memorialized and what is being experienced is total. The museum tells the story of a working community, of men who risked their lives at sea, of families who waited years for ships to return, of an economy built on a product that people needed. The island outside the museum is a luxury product that nobody needs, and almost nobody who works there can afford. Melville understood something about places like Nantucket. The Nantucketers had claimed 2/3 of the globe as their empire, and they had lost it all. To sand in the harbor, to oil in the ground, to a spark in a stovepipe. What they left behind was a town so perfectly preserved by its own irrelevance that a century later, a man with a fortune could look at it and see not a community, but a set. The town is now facing projected climate change damages of $3.4 billion through 2070. Rising seas are eating the very land the glaciers deposited. The bluffs at Sankaty Head, where the lighthouse stands 92 feet above the water, are eroding measurably each year. A 270-page coastal resilience plan drafted in 2021 identified 40 projects over 15 years at a cost of $930 million. The island that was shaped by ice may, in the end, be reshaped by water. The cobblestones might outlast the land they're set in. Main Street's cobblestones are uneven now, worn smooth in places, shifted by frost and time. The town maintains them carefully. In 2018, the Department of Public Works announced plans to repair the sidewalks on Upper Main Street. Where original material didn't exist, they said, new materials would be distressed to create a time-worn appearance. Distressed to look old, on an island that is old. On a winter night when the summer people are gone and the population drops back toward its year-round core, the fog rolls in from the Atlantic, and the streetlights along Main Street blur into soft halos against the mist. The Wampanoag called the island something that might have meant faraway island or sandy, sterile soil tempting no one. The locals have always called it the Little Gray Lady of the Sea. From the water on a fog-bound night, the island nearly disappears.